It's That Popular Podcast. Mitch Prinstein is a psychology professor at UNC Chapel Hill and the former chief science officer at the American Psychological Association. Aaron Keck is a political scientist and award-winning radio host. Together, they discuss the popular and not so popular quirks of human behavior. Welcome into That Popular Podcast. Now, here's Mitch and Aaron.
All right, welcome into the show. How's it going, Mitch?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm doing good. So what are we talking about this week? You're excited about this topic.
Well, actually, I have to admit that I'm feeling a little bit distracted right now because I just came from talking with a colleague. So, at the university, you get professor ratings, at the end of each class.
Right.
And they're anonymous.
These are like the student evaluations, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
So, students can write whatever they want, and then you get it a little while later after they're like free from your grading grasp to read what they said, and it's anonymous. And, there's a lot of talk about students today, but I'm floored. I can't believe what she's telling me. But so a colleague of mine, also a professor, she got her evaluation, and not just one person, but several people said, I think that the teacher did a bad job because she made tests on Tuesdays. And she's telling me this, and I'm like, wait, what? And she goes, and apparently the students were like, yeah, that's kind of not fair because then we forget to study over the weekend and then we get bad grades. And that's the teacher's fault because if she had just made the test on Thursdays, she could have reminded us to study on Tuesdays.
Oh, right, of course, yeah.
I'm like, wait, what? Because I haven't been teaching for a few years. So
right.
I don't understand. So their grade is the teacher's fault because the teacher made a test on a Tuesday and it's the teacher's responsibility to remind them to study for their test.
That's a little weak.
I mean, could you imagine when you were in college? Like, I'm sorry, but you have to remind me to study for the test. And you have to make it at a time where you have time to, like, what if you came into work for a presentation and you're like, oh, I'm sorry, this presentation was on Tuesday. You didn't remind me on Friday to do it. So I'm going to have to push the presentation to Thursday.
I mean, my husband works in the tech industry, and he has told me stories about people having some really unusual expectations for what they think other people are required to do and what they're entitled to have from them.
Seriously?
So,
like what?
yeah.
Like what is the corporate world these days for that?
I mean, you tell someone 14 times to do someone, and then they come back and say, well, you never told me a 15th time, so it wasn't on my list. Yeah, kind of thing.
Okay, am I like hyper responsible or conscientious now? I'm
possibly,
I'm questioning
yeah.
myself. Like, really? Because if you tell me there's a test like 3 months in advance, I put it in my calendar, and then I'm like, all right, I have to study in advance of it.
You do have a PhD, and you are a published author, and you just had a high-ranking position with the National Psychological Organization. So yes, you are a high achiever.
I mean, okay, thank you. I maybe there's some truth to that, maybe not, but I think but I mean, come on. If you're in college, your main task is to maybe party, but also take tests.
Right,
and
right.
If there's a test that you're told on the first day of class on the syllabus, you need to be reminded to study for, I'm sorry, I am so pro student, but this one floored me.
That's a little over the top.
I'm a little bit. I think the reason why is because there's no accepting of mutual responsibility in this.
Right.
In fact, one might argue that it is not the teacher's responsibility at all. But okay, let's just pretend that it's somewhat the teacher's responsibility to remind the student to study for their test. But it's also the students. And I can't believe that at the end of the semester, without any insight or awareness of the student's own responsibility, it's the teacher's fault that they got a poor grade in that class.
So let me also ask, what percentage of the students in the class came back with that evaluation? Was it 3 out of a lecture class of 150, or was it 3 out of a small 11-person seminar?
I mean, to be fair, it was just 3 people, and there were about 30 people in the class. But I mean,
still
10%
a lot. That's
of
a
the
lot.
class
Yeah.
saying it's the teacher. I don't know. I mean, maybe this is because of what I study and everything, but I am a big believer in mutual responsibility. And,
For sure.
I just think that every interaction we have in life is a transaction. And it is very rare that one person is solely responsible for how that transaction goes. I mean, let me be clear. Like, there are situations in which obviously one person is totally and completely at fault and they have totally crossed the line. Yeah. But I'm talking about like day-to-day stuff, that doesn't cross lines. There is something about both people that have created that interaction. And whether it's a teacher and a student, like the student's responsibility to know to study for a test that they knew about for months. I mean, I just maybe called me old-fashioned, but like I think that's part on the student.
I'm thinking back to all of the evaluations because I taught in college for a long time, and again, it's been a few years, so I don't know now versus like 2021. But I'm thinking back to all of my evaluations, and I can't remember any student ever saying anything like that level of bizarre entitlement. And now I'm second guessing myself because did I assign all the tests on Wednesday and Thursday of the week? Maybe I did. Maybe I was just like,
well, you're
inadvertently doing the thing that the students wanted. I don't know.
Apparently, you are a much more considerate professor than most because how dare you do it on a Monday or a Tuesday? I mean, it's just, I don't know. I mean, I will say also that in this class, some of the evaluations also said, apparently, you gave us like 2 freebies where we don't have to come to class. And some of the other professors give 3 freebies. So like, that's not okay. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You get to just skip 2-3 classes with no consequence. Like the professor doesn't just get to skip a class. Like, sorry, I didn't feel like coming today. Like that. How is this preparing them for the work worlds where it's like you get to just no show?
Okay, so all of that said, and I don't think this is where you want to go, but it's definitely something that has to be said in the context of like student evaluations and what gets said to which professors in which class. The operative word, one of the operative words that you mentioned in all of that was she. Like this is a woman professor, and there has been a lot of research, right, on student evaluations for male versus female professors, and students can be harsher on female professors. That's pretty well documented.
Absolutely true. I mean, I think you're totally spot on, and I wonder if she would have gotten the same comments if she were not a female professor. Like,
probably not.
I don't know. I just think that to me, it's horrible that my colleague got those comments, and to be fair, like. And 27 wonderful comments, right?
Of course,
so like I'm totally blowing out of proportion because I'm shocked and appalled, but but it was totally fine. But I think for me, it's more of like, how much do people recognize their own role in something? You know, like it's interesting because in the last, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, I was privy to a conversation. I was witnessing this kind of interaction that, let's just say it did not go well. Mm-hmm. I'll put it this way. There was person number 1 and person number 2. And person number 1 kept saying, can you describe more of what you're talking about? I don't get what the thing is. What's the thing? And person number 2 is like, what do you mean? And person number 1's like, I just don't understand. You're not getting it. And this is really frustrating. And I have no hope in you anymore. And person number 2's like, why are you blaming me for not understanding what you're talking about when the best you could do at describing it was using the phrase, the thing. Like, it's a little rich that like, you're not taking at least a little bit of the responsibility to say, maybe I am not communicating well enough what my expectations are for you. But doesn't that kind of stuff happen like all the time?
Yeah.
Like you're in a conversation with somebody and they are totally getting frustrated. Like, why aren't you doing this? Or, what's going on? Or why don't you want to listen to me? And the other person's like, because you didn't like say it. Like the responsibility of this conversation being successful is twofold. The person who is saying things and the person who is receiving things. Yep. And sometimes the error is that someone's not receiving the information correctly, but it's so rare that we acknowledge, even when it's ourselves, maybe I'm not conveying the information appropriately.
Right. Yeah, there's so much that goes into communication, right? It's the words that you say, and it's the tone with which you say them, and the body language and the expression on your face, and all of those things add up to the thing that you're communicating, and then that has to be received by the other person in the correct way. And getting back to these 3 students, like, we can be pretty entitled about like being in our own heads about we're communicating perfectly effectively, or we're always in the right and the other person is always in the wrong. So any disconnect, we tend to put it on the other person and not think about our own behavior and adjust accordingly. And I'm always kind of gobsmacked at the fact that we like as a species have managed to advance as far as we have and like develop things like architecture and advanced technology, because the amount of communication that requires is staggering and we're not always good at it.
100%. I mean, the way you describe it is so accurate. And, there's really interesting research that looks at kind of the brain and how the brain is responding to information. And our brains are so exquisitely tuned in to the teeniest facial expression.
Yep.
The tiniest change in the tone of voice, just like you say. And we now, I'll just say on the side, we now live in a world where all of that's been dumbed down to like the presence of a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Like all of the nuance and innuendo in our entire interactional, kind of realm has disappeared. But we're still programmed and we're still very, maybe even more sensitive now because we don't get as much practice with it.
Yep.
To every little teeny tiny. So if you're, let's say, with your partner, like, hey, I guess I'll empty the dishwasher right now. You're like, wait, what? What are you saying? You're saying that you have to do it because I don't ever do it? Is that what you mean? And what's happening there is there's two things. One is that we're picking up on tiny little nonverbals as well as verbals.
Yep.
But the other thing is, and I think this is super important, everything you're giving and everything you're receiving within communication is happening through a very thick filter of emotion.
Yep.
And most of our conversations have some level of emotion in it. So it is distorting and biasing the way that what we think we're saying is not coming out the way we think it is.
Yep.
Because we've got a fair amount of emotion underlying what we're saying. Maybe that person is like, yeah, actually, I am pissed you never emptied the dishwasher. And they don't realize that that's coming across. And then everything you're receiving is coming through like, wait, what? Are you criticizing me the way that my parent did when I was 12? Like, all that's happening in every interaction.
And I think that's why, and I think older people are now like getting into this more and more, but I think there was a time lag between older people who had grown up and come of age in a world without texting, did not get the importance of emojis in texting.
Yeah.
But they are so vital for exactly this reason, right? Because when you're texting back and forth with someone, you don't have the facial expressions, you don't have all these other clues. It's just the words on the screen. And it is so easy to misinterpret tone when you're just looking at the words on the screen. So you need the smiley face, the thumbs up, the frowny face, the crying, laughing, whatever, all of these different things in order to convey tone properly. Because otherwise it's very easy for one misinterpretation to pile on another, and then you're off to the races and you're having a passive aggressive fight. And I've seen that 1,000 times.
1,000 times. We all have that experience.
And
like,
you just need
totally
emojis.
normal. Yeah. I will say, I will reserve the right to totally not understand why my kids can send like 70 emojis and there's no words at all. I'm like, what hieroglyphics situation are you communicating with this? But
also thumbs up is passive aggressive negative now. I don't know if you know that.
Really?
Yeah,
what do you
yeah.
mean? Like,
thumbs up is all right, fine, that's great. End of conversation. I'm moving on to the next thing.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right. Sometimes thumbs up is a little bit like, I'm done texting back and forth.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, but sometimes if it's like, hey, see you at 12 o'clock.
Yep.
And I'm
thumbs
like,
up. Yep.
Sure.
Yeah. It depends entirely on the context.
Oh
yeah.
my God.
But a lot of times,
Wow.
If you send a thumbs up, it might get misinterpreted as a negative, like, all right, whatever. I'm not interested in you right now.
So we're compensating for the fact that our brains need and want a ton of context, but we are now communicating mostly in a way that there's not an easy way to communicate that context. So here's the thing, like, I think that if we entered into every interaction, let's say not on text, let's just say, regular interaction, recognizing I am doing my best to tell you what I'm thinking. I'm probably accidentally telling you more about what I'm feeling than I think I am. And if that person doesn't get it or responds in a surprising way, don't just get pissed at them. Don't be shocked at their reaction. Take a moment to have the equal responsibility to say, maybe there's something in the way I said it. So when I went to graduate school for psychology, you start seeing patients in your second year. And it's really funny because when you're like a third, fourth, fifth year in graduate school, you see the students below you kind of do this.
Right.
And it's as soon as you start doing therapy, you start talking with everybody in your life as if everything is a therapeutic kind of interaction.
Right.
And one of the huge things there is what we call reflective listening. And it's this idea of And it's funny because in graduate school, people do it way too much. And you're like, okay, you're totally coming across like a psychologist right now. But someone being like, listen, I need to talk with you about something. Like, so I feel like I emptying the dishwasher like 6 nights out of 7. And I feel bad about being a nudge about it. But I really kind of hate it. And I'm just wondering if we can just talk a little bit about what this is like for me.
Right.
And then the person will say back, okay, what I'm hearing you say is that you hate doing the dishwasher and you think I'm a freeloader. And then the person's like, no, thank you for the opportunity to clarify. That's not what I meant to say. I'm sorry if it came across with that level of emotion. Like, so no one does that in real life, except for second-year graduate students in clinical psychology, right?
Yep.
But the principle is not a bad one if it was less weird. And that is like taking a moment to be like, especially like if there's a little bit of alcohol involved, if there's a little bit of a fight brewing, if you're in a couple situation, you're like, oh, I see the storm clouds coming. I know that we're headed towards an argument. Like to just stop for a second and be like, okay, wait, this is what I just heard you say. Is that what you meant to say? And it's shocking. Like 7 times out of 10 be like, oh, actually, no. Now that you're playing that back, like, I don't know whether I said it wrong or you're hearing it differently, but like, let me take another crack at that.
Yep.
And it just solves so much.
Right? Yeah. I think this is so applicable, like just across the board, like starting with the interaction between the teacher and the student, but also just like in any human interaction, like just trusting until proven otherwise, trusting that the other person in the interaction is acting in good faith and with positive intent.
That is huge. Because how many times do you find yourself in a situation where you have been wronged a few times and then you don't have that trust and positive intent and then you're at each other's throats before anyone even says a word?
Yep.
Like the trust has to be there, or at least a worldview that probably people meant well. And not everyone has that worldview, and perhaps for good reason, so that's fair. But keeping that in check and then recognizing like, okay, I think I'm hearing this. I'm not going to just get pissed at them, or I'm not going to be pissed at someone else because they're not listening well enough. I'm going to just assume that they're trying to listen.
Yep.
They're intending to hear me. Maybe I didn't say it right. Maybe I said the thing too many times, and they have no idea what the hell I'm talking about.
This is also a good principle in improv, right? Like I did improv comedy for 8 years, and it's that basic principle of yes and, right?
Yeah.
Like whatever, like it's the only way that improv works. You're getting on stage with no script, no set, no anything. You don't know what your character is or what's going to transpire. And the only way to make that work is whatever the other person says, you accept it as truth and add on to it. You yes it and you and it.
Yeah.
But that requires that trust that the other person is acting in good faith and your willingness to like acknowledge and accept what they said and add on to it. That same principle works in every human conversation, right? Like that same principle applies for if there's that moment of clash or tension, like, okay, I accept what you said and either I'm going to build on that or like move it over here or something. But like that initial acceptance of the thing that's being said is so important to keeping a conversation in that positive frame of mind where you can have those interactions without the misinterpretations.
And that's such a great example of how that works. I think like I really like that because I think also there's an element of having to trust the other person in there too and be like, okay, you threw something out. I don't get what you're doing, but rather than negate it or slap it down or humiliate you for having said something that's seemingly random, I'm going to work with you. I'm going to assume that you know where this is going. There's positive intent. Like, I just think that's such an apt example. Like, I really like that. Yeah.
Is rate my professor still a thing?
Oh, yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah.
But you're rated on a couple of dimensions. One is how easy you are as a grader. One is on how good you are as a teacher.
Right.
And then the number of chili peppers that you get indicates whether or not you're hot.
Yes.
So
the most important part.
Well,
the one that everyone professor looks
exactly.
at. Right.
And it was tempting to look at people's tenure dossiers and be like, okay, are they going to cite that, yeah, their evaluations stink at teaching, but most of the students find them hot, so let's give them tenure. You know, like, is that...
I don't know. If most of the students find them hot and still ding them on being a good professor, that's like strike 3 right there.
Oh my God.
If your student finds you hot, they're going to be inclined to think you're a good professor. But if they go online and they say this person is hot and also bad at their job, then that's just not okay. That's so many red flags all at once.
Okay, we have to pin this to talk about in the future because there's this whole literature on physical attractiveness and how it like plays out in so many different ways. So you're absolutely right. But I'm just going to say, yeah, I think that it is interesting. One of the things that I talk about with students a lot of the time, it's the same idea of responsibility. I say, so I used to do this thing at at orientation for UNC, where the students who are pre-first years, you know, like a few weeks before they start, they come in and they have this lecture called The Professor's Perspective. And for whatever reason, they asked me to kind of come and do that. And I would talk about like, here's what to expect in college. And one of the things that I said there is I said, look, let me be honest. Some professors are really boring. And some of these are, you know, it's going to be really hard to sit through class. Let's just be, you know, truthful about that. I said, but a boring professor is in part also your responsibility. Because if you just sit there like they're a YouTube video and you just watch it and you're not giving any feedback at all, they're just going to drone on in the most boring possible way. I was like, but if you raise your hand and you say, can you explain that some more? Or, I don't get that. Or is that like that thing you mentioned 7 weeks ago that I also didn't understand, but I think I'm seeing a connection? Then you're encouraging the professor to get off their script, change the way they're talking about it, tailor the information to what you're most interested in, or explain the things you don't get. And it becomes more of an interactive experience, which most all professors would prefer an interactive experience than like just
Big time.
them droning on. So I say to the students, like, yes, it is true that a lot of professors, you know, maybe they kind of suck at lecturing, but you have a role. You have some responsibility in making that a better class.
Yep. The next time you do that professor's talk, are you going to tell the students first and foremost, you're going to have tests on Mondays and Tuesdays, and that's on you?
I think I will. Oh my God. I'm still like, I can't believe that. I'm going to be back to teaching in under a year now. And yeah, I'm thinking about a test on Monday just to see what happens.
Might as well,
I'm not
yeah.
like cruel, but what? Come on.
This has been That Popular Podcast. Find all our episodes on thatpopularpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.